Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting. And today we are joined by a brand new coach to the show, our good friend, Katie Christensen. Katie is a fellow Gallup Certified Strengths Coach and Eat to Grow professional. And she is the visionary founder and owner of Bikuba. At Bikuba, the overarching mission is to empower organizations to thrive by unlocking the full potential of each employee. Katie employs a distinctive approach centered around fostering strengths awareness and cultivating high-performing habits and teams, something Jen and I are also thrilled to do with our work. Katie, through her blend of team training and personalized one-on-one coaching and a cutting-edge digital learning platform, she and her team champion transformative and substantive change. Her holistic strategy aims to create a culture of engagement and excellence, aptly named Thrive the Hive. I'm going to see if Katie wants to add anything to that once we're done her official intro. But this unique initiative is not just a philosophy, but a practical tool that significantly impacts individuals, teams, and organizations, contributing positively to the world that stands to benefit from the best that each of us has to offer. Katie comes to us today from her wonderful home in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Welcome, Katie.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It is super fun to be here with both of you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And we've invited Katie on because she has a talent that Chad and I do not have high. Katie's talent is context. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And before we jump in, Katie, can you tell us where context falls for you in your top 5?
Yeah, it's number 2. So it's
Number
way
2.
up there. Yeah.
Awesome. And so now we'll let everybody know where it falls for us. Chad, where is it for you?
This is number 30. This is the last theme I have at the bottom of my list that is not an influencing theme. So this basically sets up the rest of my influencing themes at the bottom. Jen, I'm going to ask you, where does this fall for you?
This is 32 for me. So yeah, very close to the bottom. So we have Katie with us, thank goodness, to share all the great and wonderful things, great and powerful things there is to know about context and how she uses it. Yeah. But before we start, Chad, do you want to share the short description from Gallup?
Sure. So Gallup defines this talent theme as follows. People exceptionally talented in the context theme enjoy thinking about the past. They understand the present by researching its history. So a lot of really big topics there that I'm sure Katie is going to help us understand. And to start, Katie, I'm gonna basically put you right on the spot. I'm curious if you can talk to sort of how this context theme plays out for you, maybe expand on, that initial definition from Gallup, but just how does this play out in your life?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's interesting to me because I first came in contact with strengths about 14 years ago. So I've really been kind of strengths aware in this way for that long. And really at the beginning of my journey, I was a context denier, and I didn't see it in myself. Fast forward 14 years, and I know that I use my context about as often as I breathe. It's just so close to me that I don't recognize that I'm using it. And for me, context is a kind of a brief looking back to orient where I am now, and to say, make sense out of the present based on what I know in the past, but also to apply especially past successes to where I am now and how I can move forward, benefiting and building on the successes. I like to say my family, by the way, I have 2 teenage daughters, and we are a strengths family, my husband and my girls and I, and they know me through my lens of context. And so, for example, when they want something or they want to convince me of something, they know to give me the who, what, why, when, where, how, or the answer is no, right? So we learn how to work together. I really do need all of that information. Part of that's just being a parent. Part of that is I just need to understand, and then that's fine usually. And so it's an important part of how I make sense of a productive way forward.
That's awesome.
And such a I mean, that's an interesting take on it, because the short description we just read from Gallup sounds much more like historical, or a historian, where you're always looking backwards. I was a history major in college, so I sort of resonate with context in that fashion. But you're talking about sort of a grounding moment, but then moving it much more into the present.
Yeah, and I think for people with context, and in my coaching experience too, with others who have context, of course, like any theme, it can look a bit different, right, based on the themes that are around it.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I have come to know it more as a quick touchback to move forward than I want to just dwell in the past, which I think can be a bit of a misnomer about context, that these are people that just care about the past, that just want to go back to the past. And maybe that's what it looks like, a little raw. But for the most part, that's not how I experience it. And it's often not how I hear others talking about it. What you care about in the past might be impacted, but that's kind of pertains to the other themes, I think.
Yeah.
I think one thing I wondered is, like, if I was working with you, how do I see your context? What sort of behaviors would I notice those? Because I think we've talked before about how you have been recognized for some of like your bigger themes, or like more outwardly showy themes, and even not even seeing this one in yourself until more recently. What are some of those behaviors we could notice?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, that's the work I had to do to really understand it myself through coaching. And I had a coach who really helped me find it. And in fact, he coined it that I'm a strategic dark horse through this theme, that it's quiet to others, but at that point, it was even something that I didn't see I had. And so I would use it in a strategic way, really unbeknownst to me, because the themes my entire life, the behavioral patterns, at least, that people had called out from the time I was young, were things like woo and positivity, and sort of the ones that show themselves outwardly. And this one's way more internal. It's in my head. It's a process I run. And so you're not going to see the process at all. What you might see in someone who has context is a pause or a lot of observing. You might see them asking a lot of questions because they want to know what you know, so that they can put that into their context, right? Into their kind of vision of the whole. And a curiosity. I think context is naturally very curious. And so they may ask questions, and it's not to challenge, it's simply to know it in similar fashion to some of the other green themes. They're filling in information.
Yeah. I think that's one of the interesting things I'm already starting to hear, is the slight variation between context and my learner. My learner's number one. The listeners of the show have probably come to know that about me pretty regularly. But it is about filling out that information. But it's interesting that yours has that touch of a, not so much backward, but a grounding, and then, okay, how do we then use this? Whereas my learner is much more find the information for right now, for me moving forward. And yes, sometimes the answers include past information. And I think that's where the similarities are, but the differences is often in the immediate applicability of that information for going forward. So I really appreciate that. Jen, great question, by the way, because that was one question I had too about context. Is it seems very internal, and I think you just gave wonderful voice to that, Katie. But at the same time, a wonderful benefit. That I love your phrase, the strategic dark horse. It's there circulating in the background as you're talking. I thought about, it's almost like those programs on your computer that are running to make sure the machine works. But it's not Zoom. It's not something that's super public.
Not out there.
It's not out there. So,
right. And I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes, people who have context won't be aware of it, right? Because people haven't called out those patterns. They haven't noticed them. And yet I've contexted my whole life. I've never not known being a human and contexting, right? So well, doesn't everybody do that, right? That's so common with themes. Doesn't everybody do that? And the truth is no, right? Not everybody does that. And so we can start to see it as a talent. And when we see it as a talent, obviously we can then apply it in stronger ways.
Yeah. You have to keep in mind you're trying to theme rank 30 and 32. So there obviously are people like us that are not operating at a context level.
No, we're not operating in a context way at all. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you touched on already some of those, like what it looked like when it was raw, or context in a raw might be really focusing on the past. Would you share with us maybe sometimes where your context has been raw, or maybe even gotten to where it's maybe had a negative impact on your life? We like to talk about, like
Yeah.
the dark sides, or like running too hot, too cold,
Yeah.
one or the other, and not in that just right Goldilocks zone, as Chad likes to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Every theme has both sides, right? And so
Yeah.
being aware is helpful. For me, I think the raw side or the challenge side in an ongoing way is really sorting to the most important information, right? So when I touch back, there's a lot of information, and which pieces do I want to bring forward? And then even more importantly, which nuggets do I want to share, right? So I think of emails that I write. I am notorious for writing an email that is this long, right? And then I go through and I either put it into bullets or I cut it back. My business partner and husband will say, "Too long, didn't read, Katie. You got to shorten it up. No one's going to read that." So I think everything's important and interesting. I have to remember who the reader is. And so I've had to work on that. It's an ongoing thing I have to be conscious of, because my emails are long otherwise. And even then, sometimes they're still long. And so, yeah, I think, less is more is something, it's a phrase that I have to come back to for myself. What is the nugget that people can actually absorb? When I think about training, I might think, I want to tell you everything about strengths. I've got 90 minutes. So what can you actually take away in that time?
Yeah. That's so great.
Yeah.
Chad, did you have any questions? You looked like you were stuck in thought there.
So I was trying to recall. So for our listeners, Katie, Jen, and I had a chance to meet up during the Gallup Summit this summer, and I was thinking back to one of the conversations we'd had, and you'd sort of alluded to something around context, and that you'd mentioned something along the lines of like engaging with new communities, and sometimes that can be a bit of a freezing moment because you don't have the background. Something akin to that. I'm just wondering if you could maybe highlight that to our listeners, or clarify what I'm trying to recall from my own context and memory. But you had said something about that, and I was just wondering if you could touch on that, because I thought that was an interesting take on sort of the more negative sides of context, or being a little bit out of character.
Yeah, when it falters or when it struggles. And I told you that at the beginning of my journey with strengths, I was kind of a denier of context. And I think that when it came to life for me, when I realized, oh man, I do this all the time, is actually when I moved away from the community that I'd been in pretty much my forever, and moved to a new community. And I very quickly realized that I didn't have any context. I didn't know places. I didn't know people. I didn't know who was connected to whom, or, I'd go to Target and I didn't see a familiar face. That didn't happen when I did that in St. Cloud. Right. And so it was disorienting. And I was coaching at that time. And that was, when I started realizing, oh my gosh, I think I don't have any context to pull from. And so, because my context, if you look at the rest of my profile, is very surrounded by blue and orange. One of the things I spend a lot of time contexting about is people. How do I know people? What do they like? What do they need? How can I engage them? It's one of the things I touch back on often, or where my context is focused. So in this new setting, in my role, my position was to work with families. And so what I started doing is just setting up one-on-ones and asking questions. Tell me about you. Tell me about the culture here. Tell me about the community, and just filling in the blanks so that I could start having the context to make connections. But it was a freezing moment. It was a bit paralyzing to say, how do I move forward when I don't know what these people need or like or want, or what their history is, or what's tripped them up in the past? I don't want to trip on that again. And so you're right. There was a pause there for me. And that was when I really realized, oh my gosh, I context like I breathe. I literally do it all the time. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying my memory, because I was trying to touch back on my own context, but we just talked about, I don't have that very high. I just remember things from what I learned about people. So thank you very much for clarifying the example, because I knew that there was something powerful in there that I thought others might benefit from. So Jen, I know you want to take us to the positive side. I know you don't like dwell like here in the negative. So let's go to the positive.
Yeah, and I love that she's already showing us this beautiful example of how you used it to, like you didn't have it, you didn't have the context, yet you reached out and were asking for it in this new place when you felt frozen. So akin to that, what are the ways that you feel like your context really just makes you shine? It's that like place, that strength that gives you all that more momentum to, help and benefit your life.
Yeah. I think though, if I were going to boil it down to a word, it would be observant. And if I were going to follow it up with one more, it would be curious. And, when we're open to learning about others, experience. So it's not just thinking back to my experience, but it's what are the experiences of others or our collective spirit experience. So it's kind of about hearing the journey or the story, the narrative of others. And you can probably hear my connectedness coming in here, but how do we impact each other? And then how do we take our understanding of that narrative and care about it and apply it to our current present state? And then think about where are we trying to go with this? And how can we take that information then and not just know that information, but use it to be better together. And so I think that's kind of some of the best of my context when applied well.
Oh, it's wonderful. I love that, like that thought of like looking back to see where we move forward, how to move forward. I think that's a beautiful way to explain that. And I love that you're bringing others into this journey as well. So cool.
Okay, I have sort of a quick follow-up before we take us to sort of one of our more standard questions that we ask a lot of our guests. But I'm reflecting on some of your answers, and I'm hearing very similar, a lot of similarities between input, learner, and context. That taking in information, the processing of it, the trying to place it. Input is one that, at least my understanding is, gather a lot of information and then you figure out what to do with it later in a very broad sense. Learner, I've already started to highlight, is that asking for sort of future application or very near-term application. I'm just wondering if you could talk to your own understanding of, first of all, where is input in your theme list, if you know, but also how do you see the differences as a fellow coach? We all have different experiences with these themes. How do you see the difference between input and context? I'm asking because people that might be listening to this be like, well, wait a minute, that sounds a lot like my input.
Like me.
Yeah, it sounds like me and my input, or me and my learner. And so I'm just wondering, what's your take on sort of the difference? Because they do all reside in that strategic thinking domain. They all have nuances. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. From my vantage point, I can.
Right. That's all I'm asking for.
Right.
Yes,
exactly.
Right.
Like, I'm not sure if I can speak for everybody, but, input is kind of mid-range for me. It's not, I don't even think it doesn't even make my top 15, but it's not at the bottom.
Okay.
And, in my experience of context and people who have it, there is a particular sort of thing that they're orienting around, and it's really influenced by other themes. And so what you're paying attention to and touching in on to bring forward is important. And you're touching in on a lot of an experience, and it's maybe not as research or as input might be more about, oh, I've got this great article on this thing that could give me context. But for me, it's the experience. It's what has happened. And then how do I take that experience and play it forward in the current setting that I'm in? So in my context now, how does it matter? Where, like you said, with input, I think it's like, hey, I've got this great information and I'm ready to share it when needed, whether I'm in Trivial Pursuit or whether a colleague needs some information. I'm going to be able to share it all. And I don't have I think my input is low because I don't, retain information about every kind of thing. I retain experience. And that's one of the things that I think might be different, is that it's more embodied than it is in my head, right? Like I feel it, I know it, I've experienced it. It's not like I'm terrible with dates or, that kind of memory, which I think input tends to be better with. So, and that's for me. Somebody with context and some of those other green themes might say, oh, no, I totally do that date thing.
No, I completely understand. And I want our listeners to understand that, Katie, myself, and Jen are three people among 8 billion on the planet. So this is one perspective, but I was just curious, given that context is so low that I'm having a tough time sort of connecting it to something like learner input. I was just wondering if there might be a closer correlation or somebody that could, parse it apart a little bit better. And I really appreciate your take. I think that embodied experience is a great phrase that at least I'm going to take away. I hope our listeners do too, in starting to understand the nuanced difference between the themes, because those are a lot more distinct than, say, the domains are. So thank you for indulging me in a follow-up question, because I was starting to hear a lot of similarities between the two. I was like, wait a minute, which episode are we doing? Input or context here?
Right.
Excellent.
So not to hug the airways here, but I do have our next follow-up question that we've always asked all of the coaches on. You started to give us a really good insight on what context is sort of on its own. As coaches, we know that these themes rarely, if ever, operate in pure silos, right? We're not just accessing context. You've already highlighted that your context is heavily influenced by a lot of your relationship building themes and understanding people. I have two questions that have to do with some theme dynamics, some pairings of themes. The first of which is, are there certain themes that you find that pair really well with your context to kind of accelerate its success, or that makes it that much better for engaging with clients or thinking things through? You've talked about a lot of the internal mind work that you do. Are there themes that help that just work better?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing theme dynamics in, because I'm so, we just know I've talked about my context, but you can hear a flavor to my context. And that flavor is all those other themes that are coming alongside. So I lead with adaptability, for example. And I think adaptability is always, it's relationship building. It's always looking, how can I flex for the needs of others? Context gives me the backstory to that. Oh, this person likes it when I do this. That person prefers this. So it gives me some insight for how to really feed my adaptability, which is, I want to be flexible to the needs of people around me. And so context feeds that, right? They go hand in hand all the time. I think maximizer is, what have we done in the past that was good, but let's not leave it good. Let's amp it up. Let's take it to the next level, right? And so let's improve on whatever it was. Positivity is looking for the good in people in the past and that. So I tend to be, my husband will say almost obnoxiously, like, I get over things. So I'll be upset about something, and then I get over it really fast. And I think it's that positivity which sort of chooses, right? We can land on the negative of the past or the positive, and that would help me pull on the positive. So I could go through all of them, and I think they all have a way that they come together and help and kind of amp each other up in positive ways.
No, I appreciate that, obviously, and you could hear it in all your responses. You could easily go through all, your top 10 and see how they all pair together. I also think it's a great thing about this theme is that it does seem to be one of those things that is much more likely to take sort of the flavors of the other themes and really sort of soak it in. I don't know why that metaphor is. Maybe it's that I was watching Beat Bobby Flay last night, but they talk about ingredients that like soak in the spices or the taste of other foods, and then there are other ones that are really strong that do the flavoring. And so what I'm starting to hear a little bit is context is one of the ones that can really grab whatever the tastes of the other themes around it. And we're hearing a lot of your relationship building things. Let's just I want to sort of take a variation on the question a little bit, and this kind of goes back to Jen's questions around kind of maybe the negative side, or where the context gets going, maybe in a little bit of the wrong direction, or going a little too far. We all have the themes that can easily get away from us, even as experienced coaches. Are there particular themes that you use to kind of maybe not rein in context, but kind of bring it back to its best contribution? Are there themes that help you do that?
Yeah. I think my activator is super important to not letting my context kind of go down the rabbit hole, right? Because and I don't even think it's on purpose. I think it's really more of a happy accident. I don't think about it. I don't call on it on purpose, where sometimes I'm really intentional about the way I dial my themes and I use it on purpose. activator is just so innately impatient that it's not going to wait very long for context to go down that hole very deep. And so what it does though, is it sort of prevents me from getting stuck or staying in the past maybe too long. It's grabbing and it's going. And I think that activator is constantly influencing that in a positive way that doesn't allow me to get kind of bogged down. But I'm not aware of it until I get asked this question, right? And then I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's my activator. Yeah.
You've spoken to us, at least to me, I don't know if you've shared this with Jen, but you talked about activator being sort of instinctive. And then are there themes that you just sort of consciously have to dial up or dial down that can also help with kind of managing or moderating your context theme?
Yeah. I'm really a proponent of the idea of dialing. And I think we can have that kind of control over all of our themes. And probably because I spend all day coaching people on it, I think about it a lot for myself. And so, I think any of my themes are better when dialed. It's just, for the situation even. I'm not going to dial it the same for every situation. But, I think about, maximizer. How do I dial the excellence up without getting to perfection, right? You can push into perfectionism with that. And so it's really finding the fine tune on the dial to say, okay, let's amp this up. Oh, no, a little too far. You're going into perfectionism and that's going to make everybody around you crazy. So it's that fine tuning. And I think you can do that with every theme, belief and what do I value? And that's strong for me, and so how do I dial that to bring the best things forward that are valuable, not just to me, but to the community or to all.
Excellent. Thank you so much for indulging those two questions. It really is, it's so interesting to hear, even in the bio you sent us, just hearing even some of the themes displayed in, pairings or groupings of 2 or 3 of them. I was reflecting on that as I was, thinking about, today's show and getting ready for it. So thank you very much for highlighting those combos. I think they'll be hopefully helpful to some of our listeners as they're thinking about trying to maybe manage or get the best out of their context theme. So
well, and I love too that you even shared with us these themes that are working on their own that aren't even like like on purpose thought, like you said with your activator and I feel like that's how mine works as well. My activator as well, like is just always there, that impatience, like waiting to get going, waiting to get started, pushing others. And to that point, it is wonderful because it is that like quick starter. And I see how it can help pull myself and others out of things. So it's great to see, your blend of how you use it with context, even helping you. And it's just natural, like you said.
Yeah.
I want to pull us to our next question, which is really more talking about in our experiences with our clients. So I haven't coached a lot of people who are high-end context, but I have had a group of folks that had context high. And it does play out just a little bit differently than what I'm hearing yours play. And I'm sure it's based on the pairings and the other themes surrounding it. So I wondered, before I share my example, do you have any other examples of others that you've coached where their context looks different and maybe some of the behaviors maybe come out differently than yours?
I think, every context that I've run into is slightly different. And I think a common pairing with context are some of the other green themes, which of course, whatever domain is prevalent, you're going to feel the motivation of that domain sort of amped up. You can hear my relationship building between my orange and my blue really impacts my context. Same with anyone, who has really high executing or really high strategic thinking or influencing, any one of those. It comes around that and sort of enhances it and sort of piggybacks and almost bolsters it a bit. I have certainly run into people, or oftentimes the perception by others of people with context, that they're always talking about last year, last month, and they are referencing back once in a while, maybe going there too much or verbalizing it too much, right? So it's for me a constant in my head. What I've had to sort of negotiate is, how much do I share what's in my head? Do I need to always say, well, last time, Or, and this is in coaching too, or can I help people say, yeah, you're going to do that? And then do you need to bring that all forward or share all of that? Or can you just, say, hey, this is what I think, might not need to share the whole backstory.
Yeah.
So, I think it's flavored by what's around it. And occasionally I will see somebody who's at least perceived as being too in the past, even though as I coach them, I don't think they see it that way, but they talk a lot about where they're getting their information, which is the past.
Yeah, that's a great lead in. I was reflecting back to someone I had coached who had context as number 1, communication number 3, and strategic was hiding in there at number 2. And what I heard a lot from this person was this constant looking at how things went last time. It was like you said about the experiences, and then really communicating why it was so important that we, where we made the mistakes in the past and how we're moving forward with those. And after our conversations about context before, it really helped put that person in perspective for me and what they were dealing with and how they weren't sharing the stories to be negative, to bring out the faults that had happened before, to really hammer on where things fell down in the past, but really about how we can move forward and learn from what we went through last time in order to do things better this time. That strategic context mix, and then having the communication, the ability to explain that, tell stories, share examples that made it easy for other people to be like, okay, I see where you're going with this. So I just thought that was really wonderful. After reflecting on some of the conversations we've had about context, it really helped me see that come through, and why he was so very good at explaining to others and getting others on board with what we're going to do different next time.
Yeah. And what really jumped for me when you were talking about that too, just to make another point is, and I would be curious about the rest of his profile. I'm always curious about that because I heard restorative context in what you said. He was looking back and always looking at, okay, what didn't work? How do we fix it? When you listen to me talk about context, positive maximizer, it's what worked and what can we build on, right?
Yeah.
And so even just look at the nuance in that based on your other themes. What in the past are you paying attention to? People, systems, what's right, what's wrong? It all gets flavored and can all be beneficial, but how is it perceived, by others? Oh, they're always looking at the negative of the past. Could be a place where somebody isn't intending to come across that way, but they are to others.
Well, and so to round it out, belief and achiever were 4 and 5. So when I think about my belief and how it's worked for me, and I heard it out of you, even just with a little bit you shared, I feel like it's the heat, it's the fire behind all my other themes. It's the fire behind what's going on. It's where it comes from for me. So for him, in those instances when we fell down before, he felt it at a deeper level. We crossed a line, we crossed a barrier, that belief was offended maybe in this. And so let's not do this again. And here's how we're going to get there. And that achiever, of course, propelling the movement.
That's I think that's spot on. I have belief too, and I call it my backbone, right? Without it, I think I'd be kind of mushy.
Oh, sure.
But it's my
I like the backbone. That's awesome. All right, Chad, do you have any examples of context that you'd like to share with us?
I really don't. I really couldn't come across anybody that I had really gotten deep with in terms of a coaching relationship that had high context. So this is actually one portion of the show that I don't actually have a ton to offer. I've seen I've seen people have context in some of the workshops I've done, but those are 40 or 50 people, and it's kind of hard to get their flavor on it. And especially I would especially point out that and this may actually have more impact when we start talking about teams, is that one of the things I'm really taking away from this show is how internal this theme is, and how it may be very easy, especially for the fellow coaches that might be listening to this podcast, of if you're looking into a crowd or into even just starting to get to know an initial client, my understanding or my kind of takeaway is you're really going to have to dig for figuring out what this context outwardly looks like, because as Katie, you've done a wonderful job of highlighting this is so much an internal thought process.
Yeah.
And that is one of the big differences I'm noticing between, say, both of these being on the strategic thinking learner. People can say that all the time. I ask so many questions and I want to know so much, and I'm usually trying to research something, but context is about, processing those experiences, pulling from that. It's kind of that experiential Rolodex to a certain extent. I'm probably dating myself with that reference, but finding this is what happened last time, and building on that experience. Right. That's such an internal thing. And so I don't think it's something I'm going to be reflecting on is when I look out in a crowd and somebody's got context on their table tent, what am I actually going to see? And what does that look like? And how do you draw it out? And so I really appreciate your thoughts. So my short answer is I don't have anything in particular to contribute to this question, but you've brought up a ton of thought, items for myself that I'm going to go back and have to reflect on. So, so in terms of actually trying to connect people with this theme, especially, some of those first timers that we see in workshops and people that might have just taken their assessment, I am kind of curious if there's a particular image or pop culture reference that you go to when you think about context, or maybe starting to explain it to somebody that our listeners could maybe benefit from. Is there an image you'd like to share with us around this theme?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that I really like and do use when I'm coaching, but one for me that's maybe most relevant is the rearview mirror. You've probably seen it or heard of that before, but where, you're using your mirrors to glance back and, make sure something's not sneaking up into your blind spot. But you're 98%, if not more, of your time is really focused on where you're going and moving forward. Where am I now? Where am I going? And so it's just that glance, but it's constant. You don't just glance once at the beginning of your trip and once at the end or here and there. It's just kind of all the time. You're scanning, right? And it's to prevent things from tripping you in the future. And so, there's someone in my blind spot. I'm not going to move into that lane. And so that one is one for me. I think another one that works is a frame. It's sort of like, what's the frame for where I am right now? What goes around it? What came before it? And kind of, highlights it and lifts up what is the present. But there's something that goes around what happened now. We didn't just land here all of a sudden. My connectedness would never allow for that. And lastly, it's sort of a blueprint, right? The blueprints are important when we're building something because it's the foundation. If we don't have a solid blueprint to build from, we're going to have a disaster. And so it's going back to the blueprint and making sure things are solid there so that we can build and continue to build from there. So those are a few that kind of resonate for me.
Nice. Those are
like
excellent. That. I love them. Yeah, I've heard the blueprint one before, but I'm especially appreciative of your rearview mirror. And again, the internal, and it's so sort of unconscious, it's, you're thinking about it, but you're not thinking about it, right? You're thinking, I need to check to make sure, nobody's going to rear end me or somebody's sitting in my blind spot, but then it's right back to the main focus.
And what's interesting for me is it's that constant. I guess like I was thinking, with context so low for me, you're looking back once at the beginning and then like on you go. Now we're moving forward, but that constant like kind of quick touch back is really cool.
Yeah,
it really is. And it's subconscious too, right? And that's why I think so often context is like, I don't do that, right? When they first hear that term and read about it, like, I don't do that. Well, I don't, if you asked me, do you look in your rearview mirror a lot when you drive? I might say, I don't know if I do. But if I then went in my car and drove somewhere and paid attention to it, I would notice, oh my gosh, I'm constantly looking up and looking to the side. I'm just not aware of it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Jen, do you have a good image that you like for this theme? I know it's both. It's really low for both of us, but
it's low. And so I always thought of it as, like this history books, like being able to look back to see what's going on. I've been watching Suits on Netflix. And so right now I have the law archive, like in my mind, like they, checking to see like where this case has been tried before and all the different ways it had been, tried and or other cases that were tried. And so like thinking in that context as like pulling together all of the like past ways so that we can look at how we could maybe do it differently for the future. Maybe that's the one I'm pinning on right now.
Nice.
It's the library.
Awesome.
You?
Yeah, so I didn't have one coming into this episode, but as I've listened to a lot of Kitty's responses, I'm for some reason my mind is tapping into kind of my family's military history. Both my father and his father were both in the Air Force, and so I think of like Air Force or Navy pilots that will do touch and goes. So if you don't land quite right, especially like aircraft carriers, if you don't get the distance just right, it's that touching down and then immediately hitting the burner, the afterburners again and launching right back off. And so the way I'm connecting it to a lot of what you shared, Katie, is that it's that touching of the past, but you're not landing on the carrier and like try to take the aircraft carrier with you.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's landing, it's briefly touching down, and then jumping right back into the future.
Love that.
So yeah, that's sort of a quick image that came to mind as you were talking.
Great.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I want to pull us into, now that we lightened it up a little bit, now I'm going to pull us back down. So this,
not back down, just forward.
This
like
section. So I'm sorry. Of course, forward. Yeah. So instead of now thinking about ourselves and yourself and how you use it, I want you to think about your context theme and working with someone else who maybe has context, or in the terms of when we think about others and how they can best interact with someone who has the context theme high. What advice would you maybe give to team leaders or even peers to help someone with context bring out their best contribution to the team? Like, what are some ways that you can kind of bolster them so that they feel, free to, really use that context theme?
Yeah, to its best. I think it's a really important theme to be asking this question because it's not common. And so when you have really common themes, they tend to get taken care of just by the needs of the group, right? If you have a lot of achievers, well, those needs tend to be met. But when you have a context, you might have a team of 20 people in one context. And the needs of the group will trump the needs of one, and you'll miss what that one theme has to offer, because that theme will tend to be silenced by the group. And so it's such a smart question, I think, to say, how do we honor each of the themes? For context, it's that opportunity to invite, hey, as you think about where we've been with this, what's rising up for you? What's worked before? Have there been any trips that we want to be aware of? What's rising up for you? And just provide that opportunity to share, especially maybe you're launching a project or you're visioning what's coming next. And oftentimes I think context will kind of go silent if it's had an experience of people sort of rolling their eyes at, oh gosh, here we go again, trip down memory lane. And so really inviting that context to be a part of the conversation and naming it as important. It's not the only thing that matters, but it's one thing that can provide some great insights, and it will light up that person because they no doubt have something that's rolling around for them that could be important.
Oh, that's great. That's a great example and advice. Chad, did you have anything to add with that one?
Well, I was wondering, again, this may be going back to the conversation we had at the summit or one of our other engagements, but we've joked about but also use as an example your daughters of the who, what, when, where, why. So I would just offer or ask, is that another way a leader could sort of preface or preload somebody with context to help them kind of offer up their mental, as we've talked about, this is kind of an internal mental processing toned theme. I'm just wondering if there's other ways that you can get that context person to sort of engage with the conversation. So the who, what, when, where, why seems appropriate. Are there any other questions that a leader could use to get that out on the table?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. Flipping it around on the flip side, how can you share the context that you have? I mean, nothing makes me crazier than when somebody drops me into the middle of a situation and says, what do I do? And I go, I don't know. I have a million questions, right? Like, give me the backstory. And people who know me really well, especially other strengths focused people, will be like, here's a little context for you. I mean, just lead with that, right? And so giving the context, giving a little backstory, instead of just dropping people with context into the middle, is going to allow for them
Right.
to orient more quickly, get on board more quickly, tap into their own, context. But you can really fill in the blanks for somebody because they likely are going to want a little bit more information in order to orient and then apply and contribute.
So let me follow that up, because you've introduced the idea of sort of preloading somebody with context with a ton of information.
Mm.
Is it more beneficial for the leader to say, if they've got somebody on their team that has context, would you suggest more of a like, what do you need to know kind of question, or just dump everything on them and then let them figure out what they need to sort through? Where's the balance there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record. Probably depends on who the person is,
Obviously,
right? And like,
yeah.
do they also
Yeah.
have input? Do they also have, what else?
Yeah.
What else is going on for them?
And I've posed a bit of a black and white question, so I didn't mean it that way. But I was just kind of curious, like, where's the spectrum on that?
Yeah, and for me, frankly, I can get bored with the wrong information or too much information. Like for me, I think in terms of the Cliff Notes. I don't need the details. You don't have to go back to, well, the day I was born, I want the Cliff Notes and the important pieces that are going to help me fill it in. But remember, that activator is looking for the right information succinctly. And so for me, it would just be like, yeah, drop some bullets on me. Okay, Katie, here's the quick, the quick Cliff Notes. That's going to be great for me. I know that I have worked with some people that's not what they're looking for. They really want a deeper dive and maybe even some time to process and to think about, do some research of their own to bring to the situation. So I can process pretty quickly. In fact, I think one of the things I do really well is scan, observe, and apply in the moment. So my adaptability, arranger, activator allow me to context super, super fast. I can get up to speed very quickly and use that information in, if I'm coaching or if I'm presenting, I'm always, okay, how am I going to connect with this group of people based on what I'm scanning and learning in the moment? So again, someone else could be different.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm curious then, if we have someone who is different and they are needing more information, maybe they are like, maybe don't have as many like fast themes as we're gonna call them, like you just said. Is the question why? Like, do you find you ask yourself or ask the question why often, or does that not come into it as much?
I think for me, it's all of them. Who, what, why, when, where, how is the whole totality of the context, right? It's not just why, because you could tell me why, and I still doesn't tell me anything about the past, really. It tells me why you want to do it right now, unless you say, well, last time we blah, 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 or, this has worked before. So I think for me, it's broader than just why. That certainly is a part of it, but there's more to even your experience of it. Like, what is it that's informing you and your experience that's making you say, this is what we're going to do? I don't know. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, you did. And I think it comes from my belief, like the why is really important to me. My belief and responsibility kind of tie together, and always want to know why we're doing something. If I don't have like a good reason, like I have other things I need to be responsible to. So I think that's where it came from for me. But it's one of those questions I know I ask a lot and tend to annoy people. So that's where I was going with the like asking, we all have that. Chad with his learner, you with your context, and me with my belief. It's all in those asking of questions. So I think curious.
So. And I think a question that I hear myself ask a lot or say a lot is, can you just tell me a little more about that? Or can you give me a little backstory? Those are things I hear myself say often to, friends, family, and clients. Fill me in a little bit. And then I'll even say, like, remember, I have context. You won't bore me, because I think sometimes people worry, well, you don't want to know about all this. Well, actually, I kind of do want the Cliff Notes at least, So
yeah. So it's interesting you brought that up, because now I'm starting to hear sort of the question that the leaders or the peers need to be asking, which is, they can give you the Cliff Notes, but then it's almost like the last thing that they should say to you is, okay, now that I've given you that, what else do you need to know?
What else? Yeah.
And then I think that approaches that question that I sort of bumbled into last time, which is what what quantity of information do you need? And obviously, based on your answer, and really think about it, it is going to depend on those other themes and who the person is and what you're actually engaging with. But I love that idea of, okay, provide the person some cliff notes, then say, okay, is that enough, or do you need more? And if so, what else can I fill in for you? So I think that's a great set of
great follow-up.
A great recommendation too for the leaders and peers that are working with somebody. That's awesome. Yeah. Jen, did you have any other questions around, helping leaders and peers engage with people that are so blessed as our guests?
I would love to hear, Katie. Sometimes we go to this one, and specifically because context is a quiet theme. It's not showy. It's not like, a woo or an achiever or, some of the other ones that you can see, like you can spot it, you can put your finger on it and be like, oh, I see this in you. Because context is something that isn't so visible and is a lot more internal. How can we recognize you for what you bring to the table with your context theme? What's like, if we're going to recognize you, I'm hoping that also might, spur this in someone else who has context and be like, I would love to hear that type of recognition. What would that be for you?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and to dice it down to that one theme is also kind of fascinating because I do have woo and I do have all these other things that compete for that stage. So but I think just acknowledging that the retrospective nature carries something important. And especially if it's not a lens that I bring personally, that I value when you do, I think it's a bit like empathy sometimes. Empathy has a bit of a fear around being coined as, oh, so emotional, or, oh, and I think that can be true of anything. And context kind of gets nervous about, well, if I reference an experience, are you going to be frustrated with me? And so for me, what feels really good is when somebody says, wow, thanks for sharing that experience. Thanks for bringing that to the table or bringing that onto our radar. And just acknowledging that it can be helpful kind of fills me up and makes me go, okay, I appreciate that. Thanks for letting me know that it mattered in this moment, because it does feel oftentimes like, and probably because it's sort of an isolated theme that's not as common, that it can feel frustrating to people, and nobody wants to be that in a team, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing it. And, I think some of these quieter themes, it's hard to be recognized, and we all want that recognition. We want to hear like that we're doing a good job at what we're doing and bringing, benefits and something to the table, and to not be recognized for all of those talents is hurtful. So, thank you so much for sharing, ways that we can bring that out in others. Thank you.
I love that question. Yeah.
Awesome. So Katie, as almost with all of our episodes, we could probably talk about this theme for, another 12 hours if we really want to put our heads to it and go, to the depths.
I bet Katie's got some context for us.
I'm sure she does.
Absolutely.
Some shared experiences. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
But given that, we know our listeners are busy people, and I'd love to start to think about how we can sort of wrap this up. So I'm just wondering if there might be maybe 2 or 3 key takeaways that you either want to reinforce from something you've already shared, or maybe a nugget that really didn't fit into any of our sort of more standard questions that we've tried to structure most of our episodes around. That might be really useful for our listeners. And one of the reasons we ask is that not only does it help it summarize the episode, but if we ever release sort of a quick short on this episode, we'd love to make sure to hit the real high points, and then maybe allow people to go deeper a little later. So I was just wondering if you could help us wrap up the show.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of summarize, or even for me to kind of think back on our conversation, right?
Yeah. Oh, there you go. The experience of the show.
Yeah, exactly. As I reflect back, I think that in my general experience personally and in coaching others, I do think that there's a real misunderstanding around context, that context goes back and futuristic goes forward. I would say they are both forward-thinking themes. One touches back to move forward, and the other is sort of visioning out ahead of, of anyone else, and sort of in a creative way. Both are powerful. But to challenge this idea that these are people that just live in the past, that just want to go back, that just, that's not been my experience of it. And so how do we look at it too, as in some way future oriented, but backward touching, or, bringing in, I think is one thing. Also that it is a very observant and curious theme. And so you will, I think, see context people paying a lot of attention and asking a lot of questions and wanting to know. And again, depending on what themes come around it, what they want context around, or what their current situation is going to direct what they're looking for context on. But it's a sincere desire to know others, I think, to bring a good experience, to make something better, and again, in a forward-looking, moving kind of way that I think can get missed because of the retrospective nature of it, right?
Sure.
And yet it is really, forward speaking, I think. So, I mean, those are a couple of things that really come to mind, I think, about just sort of what do I think is important, and what can it bring to a team? And yeah, I don't know if that answers the question well, but those are some of the things that rise up for me.
Well, they're definitely things I'll be focusing on as I think about future clients that end up with context. So really appreciate you offering those two key highlights for this theme as we help others with this.
Yeah.
So we are essentially at the end of the show. I really want to thank you for all the time. As we highlighted at the beginning, Jen and I do not come to this conversation with this theme anywhere near the vicinity of being able to talk about it sort of at a personal level. Right. we obviously read off the book references that Gallup gives all us coaches, but that doesn't speak to the wonderful color and illustration that you've given to this theme. So thank you very much for spending your time with us and sharing your perspectives with our listeners. So
thank you for the opportunity. It's really fun. What I found, if I can just say this quick, as a coach, you don't always really, I'm always coaching with somebody, but to deep dive on a theme, what it said to me is I need to go back and do this for all of my themes. It was such a good practice to just go, who am I and how would I talk about it? Even though I coach this every day. So thank you. And if that's one more thing people take away, maybe, hey, go dig back in if you haven't really gone deep for a while. Because I really did do some deep searching to just think about this thing. Yeah.
Jen, isn't this isn't a thread that we've heard from some of the other coaches?
We have, yeah.
That this is self-reflective. And I just like to build on it for just a second, which is to say that, a lot of people approach us, at least I've had people approach me like, oh, well, I just want to learn about my themes. And then it's kind of a sort of a one and done kind of experience. Right. I've taken the assessment. I know my themes. Yeah. Well, no, you need to constantly go back. And even as coaches, and Katie, I really appreciate putting that out there and also being vulnerable with that of, just because we're certified coaches doesn't mean we're not consistently trying to develop ourselves and better understand ourselves and go back and reflect of, okay, is this actually how I'm using the theme? So I really appreciate that, because it should be an activity for not only us as coaches, but also for all the clients that we touch in our work, that it's important to go back and continuously refine and reflect and repeat that cycle. I know in just doing this, we're almost through kind of our first season. It's taken us a little bit longer than Jen and I think originally envisioned, but this whole experience has led me to go back and look at some of my themes and really discover some of my 6 through 10 in the same sort of vein. So I really appreciate you highlighting that again from an outside perspective, because Jen and I have had this conversation a lot with other coaches that this is something that we all need to do. So thank you.
So thank you both. And
we don't get an opportunity really to separate a theme from the others. We are so used to seeing it's not in a silo. We don't use it in a silo. But how does it work if we're really going to focus on that one theme? How does it work? And what is it pulling out? What does, like offend that theme. I like to use those words because I feel like when I'm angry or upset or frustrated about something, it's because one of my themes got offended. And we don't get an opportunity as coaches, I don't think, to talk about our themes a lot, and especially on their own. So I thank you so much, because there's so many people who are new to talents and strengths and aren't really sure what it looks like for them. And like you said at the very beginning, you didn't claim it at first, like you didn't see it. And turns out you're actually breathing it in every day, doing it as often as you breathe. And sometimes it takes a while to find that. So thank you so much for reminding us all that we need to keep digging in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to that point, I'm going to encourage all of our listeners and our viewers. Jen and I put this webcast out on each of our YouTube channels, and we publish it through Acast as a podcast. If you're reflecting on this episode, or maybe even some of our previous episodes, we encourage you to join the conversation. Leave us a review, leave us a comment, share your perspectives on context, especially if you have it, because it's not one that is super prevalent in the general population, at least based on the general distribution that Gallup has sometimes shared. We want other perspectives. Katie's been a wonderful example, but we really encourage people to engage with the conversation. So leave comments, rate the episode, do all the things that make the algorithm bots happy and can share this message with more people. So please engage in the conversation.
Yeah, and if you want to get in touch with either Chad or me or Katie, you can find all of our information in the show notes.
And so until next time, I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting, encouraging you to keep playing to your strengths.
And I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching, encouraging you to be uniquely you.